Go.
So, behind me is the New York Stock Exchange. Despite its associations with Wall Street, the address of the New York Stock Exchange is actually 18 Broad Street. The New York Stock Exchange is the world's largest stock exchange, and that is by the dollar value of the listed companies. It was established in 1792 under the Buttonwood Agreement, which was made out here on the street underneath a buttonwood tree. The stock exchange was founded because at the end of the American Revolution, we had a massive war debt. We needed a way to pay down that debt by trading securities. So the stock exchange was established, and for the first part of its life, it was all done out on the street. People were making trades on the street, under the trees, swinging around lampposts. They did move in stride, but there was an active curb market that stayed out here for a lot of years, and they would use secret hand signals to signal the people up in the windows of the exchange to make trades. They actually still use these signals on the stock exchange floor today. Post 9/11, a massive American flag was draped over the front of the stock exchange. It also got very heightened security. You cannot go inside the stock exchange anymore unless you work there. The heightened security was because they were afraid that the stock exchange would become a target of a terrorist attack, whether foreign or a homegrown grassroots terrorist attack. Wall Street has actually already been the target of a terrorist attack. In 1920, a horse-drawn cart was pulled up in front of the stock exchange. It had 100 pounds of dynamite and 500 pounds of iron sash weights. Whoever designed this to kill as many people as possible. It went off at 1 minute past noon on September 19th of that year. It killed 38 people, but if it had just been a few minutes later, the death toll would have been much higher from people leaving their offices to go for their lunch breaks. It was a massive explosion. The windows of the stock exchange crashed to the floor. Windows a half a mile away were shattered. A car nearby flipped 20 feet in the air, and the horse pulling the cart was completely vaporized. There is actually still visible damage on the building across the street. Nobody knows who did this. There has still never been anybody officially blamed for it. A lot of theories blame Italian anarchists, but nobody really knows why this was targeted. Some people speculate that it was actually the building across the street from the stock exchange and the man associated with it that was the real target. The building behind me is the JP Morgan Trust Bank. JP Morgan was a financial giant on Wall Street. He was cartoonishly wealthy. He was so wealthy that twice the United States federal government came to him for bailout money. In 1893 and in 1907, when we hit a financial crisis, he bailed them out both times. It sounds like it's kind of a noble act. It really isn't. He made massive personal profit each time. He was really serious about getting the problem solved and getting his money back. He gathered together all of the major players in the economy, literally imprisoned them in his library and said, "You cannot come out until we come up with a solution for this." A little bit of a hard-nosed guy, but he was a financial legend. He had his office right here on the corner behind me. This was a really sought-after piece of property, and in his lifetime, he chose to flaunt his wealth in kind of a strange way. If he had built a skyscraper on this property and rented out office space, he could have made a fortune. He already had a fortune, so he built a modest 3-story structure as if to say, "I'm so rich, I don't even need a skyscraper. Don't you wish you were me?" Yes, I kind of do. So the building was designed so that if it needed to be the foundation of a skyscraper later on, it could be. And of course, they did build a skyscraper later. It was finished in 1913, which was the year JP Morgan died. Before JP Morgan and his bags and bags of money were here on Wall Street, this corner was the site of the Downing Oyster House. It was owned by Thomas Downing, who was an African-American restaurant owner. It was incredibly rare and unusual at the time. He had a thriving business. But what made him a really, really great man was not that he was a great restaurateur. While businessmen upstairs were snacking on oysters, he was secretly using his restaurant and the basement as a stop on the Underground Railroad. For those of you that don't know, the Underground Railroad was a network of safe havens for slaves who were trying to escape to freedom. It wasn't just a place to sleep for the night. These people needed rest, money, new clothes, sometimes an entirely new identity, because there was a law in place at the time that any escaped slave who was found had to be returned to their rightful owner. So the people that operated these stops on the Underground Railroad were very courageous, very great people. Thomas Downing was one of them. Unfortunately, we tend to associate Wall Street more with people like J.P. Morgan and less like people like Thomas Downing. But we do celebrate one of our greatest American heroes on this block, George Washington. You're actually sitting on the steps of Federal Hall. George Washington's statue is right over there. Let's take it back to where we last left George at Fraunces Tavern. He was retiring. He said, guys, I won the revolution for you. I am going home to Mount Vernon to chill out for the rest of my life. Peace out. This was, of course, not in the cards for George. He was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. Unanimously. Can you imagine that today? That's crazy. We actually had the Electoral College in place. He did not get 100% of the popular vote. He got enough of the popular vote to get every single electoral vote. And because times were simpler then, this is how we did this. Okay, George got the most votes, so he's gonna be president. John Adams got second most, so he'll be vice president. Cool, everyone? Yes. So, George Washington gave away his dreams of a relaxing retirement and answered the call of his country, being the great patriot that he is, and became the first president of the United States. He did want to come and enter New York for his inauguration with as little fanfare as possible. He was like, let's not make a big deal of this. That was not going to happen. We were all just so excited. It took him 1 week to get here. He was met every step of the way with banquets, parades, flowers, gifts. I think it sounds really nice. If anybody wants to throw a parade for me, that's totally fine. George wasn't really loving it, but he was a good guy. He played along. They shipped him by barge from New Jersey around the tip of New York, where he was met with even more cheering crowds. They brought him to his new residence on Cherry Street. The day of the inauguration was a huge celebration in New York. People were overjoyed. Bells were ringing. George Washington himself came here to what was originally the British City Hall, and up on the second floor balcony of City Hall, he was sworn in. He was wearing an American-made suit that was so beautiful people couldn't believe it didn't come from Europe. He had a brand new set of false teeth. He was looking good. It was our first inauguration. We were a little excited and a little fuzzy on some of the details, like we didn't bring a Bible for him to be sworn in on. No big deal. We did rustle one up, obviously. He did get sworn in. Fun side note, at this time in his life, George Washington was in more or less constant pain in his mouth and jaw, unless he took 1/100th strength morphine. That's why if you look at pictures of him, he's kind of like grimacing. It's not because he wasn't a smiley guy. I don't know if he would have been anyway, but it was because he was in pain. He also, because of this, tended to kind of mumble when he spoke. He talked with his jaw kind of closed like this. People couldn't really understand him. So on Inauguration Day, as he's giving his inaugural address, people have come from miles away to hear the great George Washington speak. No one could really hear him. Afterwards, somebody asked John Adams, hey, how was the speech, John? He was like, I don't know. I was standing right next to the guy and I couldn't really hear him. But that's okay. Give the guy a break. He had done a lot for us. After his inauguration, he was brought to St. Paul's Chapel for a special Inauguration Day service. Afterwards, the crowds were so dense on the street, he could not get home in his carriage. He had to walk all the way home. The building that's here today is, of course, not the original building where George Washington was sworn in. It was torn down. This was originally used as a customs house. It was later used as a building for a sub-treasury of the United States. Later on, of course, it became Federal Hall National Memorial. There is a great museum inside, and actually some forward-thinking individual managed to save the banister and railings for the balcony where George Washington was sworn in. Good thinking. We're going to move on now down the street to Alexander Hamilton's Bank of New York.